So I get a few people asking me every now and then how I get the quality of my footage so high. You know, whether that's what my export settings, whether that's what the camera settings, whatever it is, people are constantly asking me, well, I wouldn't say constantly, every now and then, they're asking me how it is I get my footage quality so high. Well, let me break down a few things that you may be doing wrong that is preventing you from getting that high quality footage. The first and most obvious that everyone should be doing if they own any sort of professional camera is shooting manual. Stop relying on your camera's automatic settings to try and get the best exposure, try and get the best look. Just learn how to actually use your camera, and that means diving into the exposure triangle, learning what the ISO does, the aperture, the shutter speed, learning about all the different settings you can do on your camera and having full control of them so you can get the look that you want and use your camera to its fullest. Next, again, a fairly obvious one, and that is making sure your camera quality format is at its max. Whether your camera can shoot up to 1080, 4K, 6K, 8K, regardless of what it is, you want to be shooting at the highest possible quality that makes sense. I personally only go up to 4K because that's all my camera can do, and that's really enough because most things that I'm uploading are going on social media where it's being compressed anyway, and it has to be uploaded in pretty much a 1080 format. So 4K usually is enough, but if your camera can go up to 6K or 8K, and you have the storage for that, feel free to go to those resolutions. The reason I would still shoot at a higher quality format than what it is you're producing is because when you have like a 4K image and you downsample that into a 1080, that then makes the image look a little bit better than it would be if it was shot at 1080. Also, it kind of gives you a bit of room to play around if you want to resize something in post, or if you want to, change around the angles. If you have a large image, you're able to do that without losing any quality. But why this tip is so important is because in this new world of shooting everything in a portrait way, some people are still shooting wide, like myself, but delivering in portrait. Now I do that just in case there are times where I do need to use both a wide and a portrait version, or if there's resizing things like needing a square or 4x5, whatever it is, I still like to have that versatility of shooting wide so I can do whichever I want with it. However, that does mean when I'm shooting in 4K and I come in, that 1920 by 1080 is no longer as crisp as it would be if I was rotating the camera and shooting everything portrait. So kind of make that decision based on what you know your deliverables are going to be. If you know everything is purely going to be portrait, go ahead, turn the camera around, get everything in portrait because you know that's going to get you the best camera quality. But if you're going to be delivering this in another format, so whether that's a square, 4x5, just a normal wide 16x9, then yeah, just stick to shooting landscape and then cropping in if you need to. Next, getting a little bit technical, and that is shooting in the correct frame rate. If you're shooting standard talking head stuff like this, or an interview, or just general footage that you know does need to be slowed down, I would stick your frame rate at 24 frames per second. If you're going to be shooting more action stuff and stuff that you may need to slow down, that's when you then increase your frame rates to 60, 120, or even 240. Depending on how high you have your frame rate will determine how much you can slow things down. On a 24 frames per second timeline, if you shoot the footage in 60 frames per second, you can slow it down 40%, up to 2.5 times. 120 frames per second will get you 5 times slow motion, and 240 will get you 10 times slow motion. So depending on what it is you're filming, select the right frame rates. You're not just shooting in random frame rates that will give you different results. And why this is important in terms of your camera quality is because I see it so many times when people try to slow footage down that isn't meant for slow motion. They haven't recorded enough frames per second to be able to slow that down. Like this, for example, doesn't look good that I've slowed it down. But if I now shoot this in 60 frames per second and slow it down 2.5 times, you can see the difference. It's not so jittery, it's not so weird because there is enough information for the software to be able to slow this down. Linking onto that, the next point is shooting at the correct shutter speed. Regardless of the frame rate you're shooting at, if your shutter speed isn't correct, the image, it won't look good. The general rule of thumb, the 180-degree rule, states that your shutter speed should be double your frame rate. So if you're shooting at 24, 25 frames per second, your shutter speed should be double that at 48, 50. However, depending on what it is you're shooting, there may be times that you want to go off speed, where you're disagreeing with the 180-degree rule and you're changing your shutter speed from being double to something else. So when I'm shooting sports content or things that I know I want to slow down but still be really crisp, I'll most likely put my shutter speed a little bit higher than it would be if I was sticking to the 180-degree rule. This allows everything just to be a little bit sharper. Looking at this, when my shutter speed is double my frame rate, you get that very natural motion blur. There's nothing wrong with this. To me, this looks normal. However, sometimes you want to get that little bit crisper image so you have things looking a little bit more jittery. So when I increase my shutter speed, you can see every detail a little bit more. That motion blur isn't quite there anymore. And then on the reverse side, you can have this stylistic effect where you have this motion blur and everything is all I guess no other word to describe it than blurry. So you can get this thing for maybe transitions, or again, just a stylistic effect that you can put in. I wouldn't have all of your video looking like this because you can't really see what's going on, but it's cool when it's spliced in a little bit. Next is shooting in a log format. Shooting in a log format isn't necessarily going to improve the image quality and make it any sharper. However, it will give you more dynamic range, which in my opinion does kind of make the image look better. So regardless of what camera format you're shooting at, if the option is there to shoot log, I would recommend it, especially now there are so many conversion LUTs you can get from log to your Rec 709 format very easily, and then add a stylistic LUT so you can get the image that you're looking for. But when you are shooting in log, the way to ensure your camera is performing at its best is to shoot at your camera's base ISO. The base ISO refers to the lowest sensitivity your camera can capture an image whilst producing the optimum quality with the least amount of noise. So it's basically the one setting you want to try and keep the same all the time. If you can add more light in or stop down on your lens, that would be a better way of changing the exposure rather than messing with the ISO. Because the further you get away from the base ISO and you start going into, I don't know, maybe 5,000, 6,000, your camera will start to produce a lot more noise. When you have noise, your image just isn't as sharp. So try and stick to the base ISO. And that changes for every camera. Every sensor has a different ISO. For me, it's 800 or 12,800. For you, it might be something different. So make sure you know your camera and what the base ISO is. Now getting into some post-production and starting with your color grade. Color grading is something that is completely subjective. You know, there is no right or wrong per se, but when you are color grading, you do want to make sure that you have a correct base. So that means making sure your exposure is correct, making sure your white balance is correct, you know, making sure the base image that you're going to start to stylize is at a good level. So like this, for example, if the exposure was a little bit darker or the white balance was a little bit warmer, I'd want to correct this before I then start adding the stylistic look. However, with this, you do need to know your camera, know how far it is you can push the colors, how far you can push the footage before you start getting blotches and things just looking a bit weird because you tried to push the colors a bit too far. So if your camera can shoot in at least 10-bit, then you're gonna have a great time being able to manipulate loads of the colors. If your camera can only go up to 8-bit, nothing wrong with that. Just be careful of how much you're going to push the colors, because that's when you do start to see things fall apart when you try to manipulate them a bit too much. Now, the very last step in ensuring the videos you're producing are at the highest quality is in the export and exporting at as high as possible. Now, this may seem like a very obvious tip, high quality videos need high quality exports. Yes, but it does depend on where you're going to be delivering your videos. If it's somewhere like here on YouTube, then yeah, ramp up that bit rate, try and get the quality as high as possible, because YouTube, yeah, it compresses it. I found the higher the quality of my video, the higher the quality is on YouTube. But if it's for a social media like Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, that's when you want to start being careful of how high it is you have your quality. Now, everyone knows that social media compresses your footage, and it's kind of obvious because there's no way you can upload like a 10 gigabyte, 30-second video that's an Apple ProRes, it looks great, and how people can load that on their phones, I know there's 5G and everything, but it's just not going to download. So Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all of these places, all these different social medias do have to compress them so it is a good mobile format for everyone. Now, when you upload your footage to these platforms at the highest quality possible, they have to do a lot more work to compress it. The more work they have to do to compress it, the worse it ends up coming out. So I found having my export settings kind of in the middle has given me the best results, because these platforms aren't having to do that much work to compress my footage. So your export settings will be different depending on the platform you're using. However, this is what I use for my Instagram videos. This is how mine look on DaVinci Resolve. It obviously will look different on the different It will obviously look different depending on the platform you're using, but yeah, this is how I get my quality. But that is pretty much it. Make sure you are doing the basic things like cleaning your sensor, cleaning your lenses, making your subject in focus, well exposed, the correct white balance, all of those basic things, because they're going to make your image look that much better and prevent you from having to do as much work. But yeah, that's all from me. So if you have got a lesson, laugh, or a light bulb moment from this video, I'd really appreciate if you drop a like down below. And if you're feeling nice enough, you could hit the subscribe button, but I'll leave the option up to you. With that being said, I will catch you in the next one. See ya. And that's a wrap.